In Her Hands, the story of sculptor Augusta Savage. Out back, behind the house, there was an open pit filled with clay. Soft, gooey, just waiting to be shaped into something clay. Every afternoon, Augusta would sit barefoot at the edge of the pit and make little clay figures. Her mama, Cornelia, didn't mind, even if she did think it was messy. But her daddy, Edward, disapproved. He thought Augusta was wasting her time. One afternoon, he came out to the pit and gave her a sour look. "What's you doing there, girl?" Augusta held up her hands, sticky with clay. "Playin', making stuff." "Playin'?" Edward shook his head. He was a preacher and didn't believe in play. "You ought to be reading the Bible instead," he told her. "Cultivating your mind, saving your soul." "I don't want to read the Bible," Augusta said stubbornly. Edward grabbed her by the wrist and yanked her to her feet. "Don't you never talk back to me," he said, and he gave her a sharp swat on the rear so she wouldn't forget. Twice a week, the entire family had to go to church. Augusta and her sisters would put on their best dresses, and the boys their best pants, and Cornelia would take them down the road to church. The only part of the service that Augusta liked was the singing. After her father's sermon, the men and women of the choir would step forward and begin to sing. If Augusta was lucky, they would sing her favorite song. "He's got the whole world in his hands. He's got the whole world in his hands." After church, Augusta would hurry home and put on some grubby clothes. Then, plopping down next to the pit, she would sink her fingers into the wet, gooey clay. Nothing made her happier than to take a fistful of wet clay and turn it into a duck or a chicken or a little pig with a curly tail. The whole time she lived in Green Cove Springs, Augusta made little clay figures. She gave some to her brothers and sisters, but mostly she kept them hidden at the bottom of her mama's trunk, where her daddy wouldn't find them. Edward didn't like to see them around the house. He called them profane, and if he found one, he would crush it to dust. One afternoon, Cornelia went to draw water from the pump. Next to the shed, she found her daughter crying, clutching a smashed clay figure in her hands. "He didn't have to step on it," Augusta said, saying. "He does it just to be mean." Cornelia ran her hand through Augusta's hair. "No, he's not mean," she said. He just doesn't understand, that's all. He'll come around, Gussie. Give him time." When Augusta was 15, Edward took a job at a church in the southern part of Florida. Augusta packed up her dresses and her shoes and her little clay figures, and, with the rest of her family, she moved to West Palm Beach. But she didn't like it there. There were no clay pits in town, none that Augusta could find anyway. And for nearly a year, she didn't make a single clay figure, not one. Her heart grew heavy, and she wondered if she would ever work with clay again. Then, one day, Augusta was riding in a wagon with her school principal, Mr. Mickens, when she saw a sign in front of a shop. "Chase Pottery Factory open to the public." "Pottery," Augusta thought. "That means clay." Stop the wagon," she cried. "I've got to get out." Mr. Mickens drew the horse to a halt. "I'll be back in a minute," Augusta told him. Then, quickly, she ran into the factory. There was no one inside, but out back, under a battered tin roof, she found a long work table, a potter's wheel, and buckets of clay. Augusta wondered where it came from. "I have a friend up north. He sends it to me," the owner told her. Augusta dipped her fingers into a bucket. The clay was soft and gooey, just like the kind she had known in Green Cove Springs. Only this clay wasn't red. "Go on, take some," the potter said. "I've got plenty, but you've got to promise to show me some of your art sometime. Maybe I can learn something from you." Augusta was surprised to hear him use that word, art. She had never thought of her pieces that way before. It was certainly something to think about. "You seem mighty happy," Mr. Mickens said when Augusta returned to the wagon. Augusta nodded. "I've waited a long time for this day." At home, Augusta showed her mother the 3 buckets of clay that Mr. Chase had given her. Cornelia looked worried. "If I was you, I'd keep it out of sight," she warned. "It'll just make your father mad." Augusta hid the clay, all 25 pounds of it, in the tool shed, under a feed bag. It wasn't long before Edward found it, though. He was all set to throw it out, but Cornelia begged him not to. "Edward, I've never thought of you as a mean person before, and I don't want to start thinking of you that way now. Augusta ain't done nothing wrong. You just let her be." But it's sinful," Edward insisted. Reaching over, Cornelia took the buckets away from her husband. "You go inside and wash up now," she said. "Supper's at 5. Augusta never found out what her mother had said to her father, but from then on she was allowed to make as many clay ducks and chickens as she liked. One day, for fun, she sculpted something different. A Virgin Mary, 18 inches high, with soft, folded hands and face like an angel. She took it to school, and when Mr. Micken saw it, he was impressed. "You've got real talent," he said, "and it shouldn't go to waste." He gave Augusta a kind look. "Tell me, how many brothers and sisters do you have at home?" 13, Augusta answered, "plus me and Mama and Daddy." "That's a lot of mouths to feed," the principal said. He knew that Augusta's family was poor, and he wanted to help if he could. "I've been thinking," he went on, "if Mr. Chase is willing to give us some clay, I'd like you to teach the other students how to work it. How to make little figures like you do. If you do that, Augusta, I'll give you $1 a day." Augusta's eyes widened. "Every day?" she whispered. She couldn't believe that she had that much money. The principal smiled. "That's right, every day." Edward didn't like the idea of Augusta teaching other children to waste their time, but he was sure quick to take the $1 that she brought home every day. Long after Augusta had stopped going to school, she continued to make figures out of clay. Dogs, cats, houses, people. She liked her work, but as time passed and Augusta grew up, she wondered if her sculptures were any good. It wasn't enough that her mother said so. So she had to find out for herself. When Augusta was 27, she entered some of her clay figures in the county fair. On the day of the contest, the judges moved from table to table, writing in their notebooks. Cornelia was sure that her daughter would win. "I've seen every entry," she told Augusta, "and Gussie, yours is the best." Then Cornelia's voice dropped. "Don't tell your father I said so, but I really think you should become an artist." The judges agreed, and Augusta won the $25 first prize. She also won a special ribbon for Most Original Exhibit.